Hello again, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Mind Your Business podcast, produced each week by the Boone Area Chamber of Commerce and brought to you by our friends at Appalachian Commercial Real Estate and UNC Health Appalachian. We have reached that time in the calendar once again where it is time for our quarterly update on all things economic from our good friend Jonathan Allen of Allen Wealth Management, always kind enough to give us his take on all of the financial news related topics that are out there, but also keep you kind of in the loop on calendar type items and things that you need to do as we move toward the end of the calendar year. Jonathan, it's hard to believe that we're to that point already, but thank you as always for joining us here on the program.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here again.
Well, we'll start off with some of the fun stuff here. So, just looking around the financial landscape, there are no shortage of influences or perceived influences. Maybe I'll say it that way. Between Jerome Powell dropping some comments last week that have got the Fed out there in the news again, to conflicts overseas that may have some sort of economic ramification. How are you and your staff working to kind of keep heads or tails of all of this and bring that to your clients from an investment perspective?
Yeah. So I'll just tell you, it's really amazing to see how much we've seen in the past quarter, past 90 days. We've had a ton of information come into kind of our overall world. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is to decipher what's actually going on, because it's not as easy. There's a lot of cross currents right now in the world. And so when we look around, there's some things that are pretty positive, and then there's some things that are not so good, and then there's some things that are just downright terrifying. And so part of what we're trying to do right now is to decide what do we pay attention to, and what actually makes sense. So I'll start kind of geopolitically. Obviously, some of the things that are happening continue to happen in other parts of the world. Certainly with Russia and Ukraine, that continues to be an ever-present part of our world. And then also now Israel and Hamas and the conflict that's there. All the lives have been lost. Certainly, there's a huge human cost there. But trying to kind of tease out what are the economic impacts and how do we feel it here in the high country is something that's not quite as easy. I will say that at least with the stuff in the Middle East, the concern is that it spills into other regions and other countries. And so that's one of the reasons that the U.S. has been so quick, in my opinion, to jump in and say, kind of act as a buffer for Israel to try to prevent the conflict from spreading to other countries, especially some of those like Jordan with Hezbollah and some of the other things. And why that matters from an economic standpoint is actually the price of oil. And so if you're thinking about what the price of oil did as soon as the conflict was announced, the price of oil went up really dramatically. And that has an impact on everything that we do here. Certainly for individual consumers like ourselves, where we're going to and from soccer games and school and that kind of stuff. But also it ties into the cost of goods, because if you have to pay more for fuel, that usually gets passed on to you as a consumer, which also leads to higher inflation and some of the other things we're seeing. So kind of speaking of inflation, coming more domestically, we still have higher inflation than what the Federal Reserve would like. Just as a reminder, about this time last year, we were probably at 7-8%, maybe down a little bit, certainly down some from where we were. Right now, we're probably 3 or 4%, and the Federal Reserve's target is 2%. And what's happening, or what we're seeing, is that even though inflation has come down some, what we're seeing is that the inflation is still there. It's very persistent, and so it's kind of sticky. You'll hear people talk about that, and what that means is it's unlikely that it's going to come down dramatically anytime soon. And so that's what Jerome Powell alluded to. He said we still have inflation, and we still expect for interest rates to remain higher. And obviously, for those of us who might be looking to expand our business by borrowing, or maybe we're buying a first-time home, those all have big implications for some of our purchasing decisions if we're going to borrow money, because now for a mortgage, for the first time in a long time, interest rates are above 8% for a traditional fixed rate mortgage. That's a huge increase from where it was even 15 months ago. That's enormous. And so that has real implications on the housing market. It has real implications on affordability. And so those are all things that kind of get woven into our financial lives. The last thing I'll mention just really quickly, as you started, is also looking at the investment portfolios and looking at how rising interest rates affects investment portfolios. Certainly valuations of companies, especially a lot of the tech companies, seem to be a little excessive right now, and rising interest rates tend to expose some of that. Also with bonds, what we're seeing is that rising interest rates is actually a headwind for a lot of bonds. So things that used to be safe now have a little bit of risk that we didn't have to pay attention to for the past 40 years. So there's a lot going on right now. If it feels a little unnerving, it should be, because there's just a ton going on right now.
And that always kind of leads us into a natural question of time to act. And, you've been pretty good about sharing some of those benchmarks or at least trends as, interest rates might be about to go up. If you've got a purchase to make, do it now. We now sit in a atmosphere where we could see another rate increase. Certainly Jerome Powell's comments led many to believe that could be still a possibility utilized by the Fed. If you saw people that were maybe kind of on the fence about end of years coming up, maybe the time is now to just bite the bullet and buy that new car or what have you. Do you foresee any major activity between, say, now and the end of December, or is this one of those times where if you've got the funds to do it, you might as well do it now? Otherwise, it may cost more in a few months or a little bit more down the road.
Wow, that's a great question. I would say I think it makes sense to go ahead, if you need something, certainly, and you need to buy a new car, certainly just to go ahead and do it. And one of the reasons I say for that is that it looks like from the things that I'm seeing is that the bond market is probably kind of telling us that the expectation is that rates are going to stay higher for a lot longer. Now that doesn't mean they're going to stay at the same level, but I think it's foolish to think that we're going to see interest rates come down dramatically within the next 90 days. So in my estimation, I think that if anything, we probably see another rate hike where the Federal Reserve raises interest rates again. They're really walking a tightrope, and this is something I've mentioned to some people, and they kind of still have questions about. So let me see if I can explain it. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates to try to slow down the economy, and the reason they're trying to slow down the economy is to control inflation. They're trying to bring down inflation. But there's a kind of a law of diminishing returns here, and so part of what we're up against is that Federal Reserve was able to bring inflation down very, very quickly with their rapid rate increases last year. But as you get further along, it gets much, much harder to bring down that true rate of inflation. And part of that is because it's not just into excesses and people borrowing and those kind of things. A lot of it's because it's in wages. And so wages aren't really as affected as much by interest rates as, say, other parts of the economy were, certainly borrowing for a house or borrowing for a car. And so that's why I think that we're going to have a harder time going forward. If I kind of, again, crystal ball, if I had one and I could look into the future based on what I'm reading and listening to from people who are a lot smarter than me, it looks like they're probably going to raise interest rates into 2024, and then they'll probably pause. And then the things that I'm reading are saying they're probably not even going to reduce rates until 2025, if then. And so, I would just say if you're planning on a purchase, certainly you want to see if you can afford it. But I would say don't delay, because I don't think there's going to be any substantial rate decreases, certainly anytime soon.
One of the things that we talked to you about a lot in the pandemic influenced economy days, when we started having these conversations, dealt around the cost of goods. And, you see interest rates staying high. That obviously makes things more expensive. But are you seeing some of those durable goods that you track and others track starting to slide down to maybe bring some price relief from that perspective? Or are those things still arbitrarily high at this point in time?
I don't. That's again another good question. I don't know if it's arbitrarily high, but I would say that they are high still. I don't see them going up as much as they were. But what I see now is that the cost of labor is actually so much. And I think, anecdotally, you probably know this from the chamber. It seems like everybody is looking for people, and so when there's a shortage of those people, you have to pay them more. And part of paying people more ends up getting factored into whether it's a hamburger or a car. Gets passed along to consumers, and that's inflationary. And so I was talking with a builder at a soccer game. My daughter had a soccer game this past weekend, and one of the things that we were talking about just on the sidelines is I was asking him if he was having any trouble finding workers, and he says absolutely. He says and he has to pay them a lot more. He's happy to do it to have the workers, but he has to pay them a lot more, which ends up translating into higher costs for the cost of him building a house. And so you think about the ramifications of that through our economy. It's not as much goods as it was, so it's not, supply chains have normalized somewhat, but what we're seeing is now it's actually in labor, which again makes it much stickier. It's not just a production issue to bring down the cost. It's actually something that's going to be with us probably for a while.
As we mentioned at the top of our conversation here, we're moving toward the end of the year. That time coming rapidly. I'm sure that there's a counter somewhere on some website that's number of days until Christmas shopping season is concluded. But with all of that said, we talk to you a lot at this time of year about things that businesses and individuals can do to make sure that from a tax perspective, they're taking advantage of all of the timing that they need to coming up toward the end of the year, and also thinking about some of the things that have deadlines that carry beyond the dropping of the ball on New Year's Eve. So what can you remind us of in that perspective, and what do you see as maybe some good opportunities to take advantage of here as the calendar year comes to a close?
Yeah, this is great questions and great reminders. Yeah, we are in the fourth quarter, so one of the things we like to remind a lot of our clients about and our friends is certainly to look at contribution rates. So, David, we had a graphic that we were talking about earlier. If you want to throw that on the screen, I'll just run through that. So this is just looking at retirement planning. This is looking at both 2022 and 2023. I don't have the numbers on 2024 yet. I can't remember if they're going up or not, but just looking at 2023, certainly the right-hand column, if you have a 401k or a 403b, one of the things I'll just remind you is keep in mind that the contribution limits went up to $22,500. So you can put a lot of money into your 401k or 403b. Also, if you're over 50, you can do an additional 7,500 for a total of $30,000. That is a huge benefit if you're looking for tax savings. The trick is, though, you have to get your employer to take it out. So if you are kind of on the fence about if you want to do it, you probably need to do it sooner rather than later to try to take advantage of all the tax reduction that you possibly can. If you're a simple 401k participant or a simple IRA, again, the contribution limits went up again from last year, from 14,000 all the way up to 15,500. And very similar, just like 401k plans, if you are over age 50, you can do an additional 3,500 for a total of 19,000. So again, some big contributions. And then if you're self-employed and maybe don't have an employer plan, keep in mind you can still contribute to a traditional IRA and also to a Roth IRA. You only get the tax benefit in the year you make the contribution for traditional IRAs. And keep in mind that amount is 6,500, and then the catch up if you're over age 50 is 1,000. So one of the places I like to start is just by saying if you're not already maxing out your retirement plans, this is a great way to try to take advantage of some kind of last year-end tax planning. Also, it's a great way that you're saving more money for yourself and putting it away for the future. And then certainly it's a good discipline to have as you go into 2024. It's likely that they probably will end up increasing the contribution limits, I'm guessing. But again, I don't know that they've released that yet. So just keep in mind, it's certainly going to be 22,500 for 401ks, 15,500 for simples. But that's a great starting point for those of us who might want to reduce our taxable income. The other thing I would just say, keep in mind, if you're over age 70, 70 and a half, excuse me, if you're over age 70 and a half, the government allows you to do what are called qualified charitable distributions. And especially this time of year, people start thinking about making gifts to charity, and whether that's a church or an organization, whatever it may be. And so if it's a 501c3, you can actually instruct your custodian, your IRA or custodian, to actually make a gift to that charity from your IRA directly. That's a great tax saving strategy. It's a great way to help your favorite charity out. And it's also a great way to make sure that that money is as efficient as possible when you're trying to support that charity. So those are called qualified charitable distributions. Certainly, if you have questions about it, we'd be happy to answer. But a lot of times, a lot of your accountant or tax preparer is probably already on top of that. So you may want to have a conversation about if that makes sense in your situation.
You know, we talked almost regularly there for a few years about changes to tax law and the ramifications to some of, again, I'll call it the pandemic-induced tax changes that came out as the government tried to keep up with all of the different economic ramifications that COVID brought to us. Has the tax arena calmed down a little bit since all of that? Or are you not losing as much sleep at night as you begin to deploy your staff in that way, because the language is beginning to settle and maybe preparers know a little bit more what to expect? Or are you still seeing changes that are brought along the tax code to help make up for some of the quick change that we saw back during the pandemic?
Yeah, I would love to say that it's getting easier, but I don't think it is. Unfortunately, I think that the pace of change has really increased, and I think that that's one thing. I was talking with somebody the other day, and we were kind of joking with each other that we would just like to have one time where nothing changes, everything just stays exactly the same, so that we can actually plan. Because it feels like for the past couple of years, it feels like advice that we gave a couple of years ago is now outdated because of some of the tax law changes. Even what I was just talking about a second ago, the qualified charitable distributions is tied to required minimum distributions, and the government changed that. So it used to be that you had to be 70 and a half in order to take a required minimum distribution. They raised the age 72. It's on its way to 73, and it's going to be probably something higher in the future. And so those are the kind of things that it's very hard to plan for, which is why usually, again, having an advisor or someone that you can talk with to kind of walk through your personal situation is really advisable. But I would like to say that that's slowing down. I don't think it is. The one thing that maybe we have going for us right now is that Congress doesn't seem like it can pass anything right now because of some of the people. So maybe that's a positive out of all the stuff we're seeing politically right now. Maybe it's slowing everything down a little bit.
Kind of forcing themselves to stay out of their own way,
Right.
potentially in that regard.
Yeah.
Jonathan, last question I have for you, and you always do such a great job of kind of helping us be a little bit predictive, not necessarily with specific actions, but just general things. As people are coming down the stretch of a calendar year, you see 2024 starting off with some of the same talking points, higher interest rates, some of the tax law being, influx, like you just mentioned there a bit. What would your advice be if somebody asked you, hey, what do I really need to be paying attention to as we move into the new year? What are those 2 or 3 things that you feel like people should put on their radars as they're putting on their hats and getting ready to celebrate the end of 2023?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple things I would probably say. The first, again, relates back to interest rates. For the first time in a long time, you can actually get paid on cash now. So one of the things I recommend for a lot of our clients to do is just to actually look at your bank accounts and see what you're getting paid. So sometimes that seems so obvious, but those are some really important things. What I've noticed is that a lot of people, yes, they know interest rates have gone up. They're like, hey, I'm not borrowing any money. I've got money in my checking account. Everything's fine. But what I'll say is maybe you have a little bit too much money in your checking account. Maybe you need to look at a money market or some sort of savings. Money goes where it's treated best. And so one of the things that I like to remind clients is that you want to find the best place that it can be treated. And so you don't have to take on a lot of risk. There's a lot of CDs and a lot of money markets and things like that that are very appropriate, FDIC insured for even conservative investors that are yielding dramatically more than what they were a year or two ago. So one of the things that I would say, just to be smart with your money, certainly you want to make sure you have money set aside for emergencies and things like that. But making sure that you have money in a money market account or some sort of savings account that earns a competitive rate of interest will help you keep track with inflation, helps you maintain purchasing power. That's a great reminder to look at kind of at the beginning of the year. Another thing I would just mention to you all is those contribution limits. A lot of times contribution limits can be kind of boring and people just kind of put it and they don't think about it again. But keep in mind, with a new year, you start the contribution limits over. So one kind of strategy that you might develop is that you may want to kind of like training for a marathon. You might want to increase your contribution percentage a little bit each year. It doesn't have to be a lot, 1 or 2%. From what you're currently doing. If you start getting in a habit of doing that over time, pretty soon you may be able to max out your 401k or your simple. And so one of the things that I try to do with clients, a lot of times we kind of want to be all or nothing people, and sometimes being all or nothing people is not right. Sometimes being really predictable and being consistent is the key to success, not necessarily having a big win or putting in just a ton of money at one time. A lot of times it's the discipline that comes with just putting in a little bit more each paycheck. And so that's what a big strategy as you start 2024, certainly thinking about that as well. And then finally, the other thing I would just say is just pay attention to the money that you borrowed. Certainly student loan repayments are probably going to get start back up. I know that there's still some things in the news about debt cancellation, but that would be another thing that I would look at. And also looking at mortgage rates, looking at the product, making sure you understand if you have an adjustable rate mortgage, when those interest rates reset. Those are going to be really important things for you to know. And by paying attention to them now, you might be able to avoid some problems in the future.
And you actually mentioned something there that sparked another thought. So I'll take privilege to ask you one more additional question,
Sure.
and that comes into the election cycle. So we're getting ready to move into a presidential election year. There's going to be a lot of talk about both personal and business finance and in economic issues. Do you foresee any major topic becoming an election debate point, and maybe something that gets a lot of attention, but maybe is drawing attention away from the in the weeds day-to-day operation of that thing?
Yeah, I don't have any hot button issue right now, but I would say that traditionally, election years are very positives for stocks. Anything can happen. There's no guarantee of anything certainly, but generally the market does do very well in a presidential election year. And there's a lot of uncertainty around the beginning, but typically as we get more certainty throughout the year about who is likely to be the next president or who's going to be elected, those are some of the issues that typically resolves itself in a really good way. The thing that I would tell you that I think is probably on a lot of people's minds, we have an aging demographic. We have a lot of entitlement programs and things like that. And I think that one of the things that's going to get drawn out is that Social Security at some point in the next few years needs to be fixed. And it's unlikely that they're going to do it willingly. It's probably going to be something that's kind of forced on whoever is in office. But I would say that one of the things that I think may become an issue, especially for a lot of baby boomer voters who are now in retirement, is going to be Social Security solvency. And so it's a kind of a boring thing to talk about, but I think it's really something that's a big deal. And this is not the first time that we've had that problem. So back in the 80s, we had the same problem. So Ronald Reagan tasked Alan Greenspan to actually fix Social Security. What did he do? He ended up raising the Social Security full retirement age. And so I think it's likely that that's probably going to be something they do again. Will it be increasing taxes or increasing the wage base? Probably, just because of the enormity of the problem. But those are some of the things that I think will likely help define some of the presidents that we vote for in the future.
Excellent information as always. We really appreciate the insight and the depth in which you take us, and also still talk to us in language we can understand. That is an art that you have definitely mastered. So real quick, before we let you go, can you give contact information to folks that may want to reach out to you and your team about any of these issues or other things more directly?
Yeah, certainly reach out to us online. allenwealthmanagement.com is our email address. You can go info@allenwealthmanagement.com. Or feel free to call our office, 828-268-9693. We'd love the opportunity to talk with you.
Well, Jonathan, we appreciate your insight as always. We look forward to catching up with you at some events soon. I know you'll be a part of our State of the Community event coming up on November 15th and plenty more after that as well. So we wish you nothing but the best. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, David.